we're privileged to have a presentation from one of our younger members of Freemasonry Victoria, who's come up with quite a impressive paper for a first off paper, and looks at some of the issues confronting Freemasonry today, and how we can possibly be challenged by those issues and how we might accommodate and live with those issues. I don't want to spoil too much what Jack's got to say tonight. So, Jack, over to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Reverend, I have to say from the beginning how grateful I am to each and every one of you for attending this evening. I'd like to say to the Victorian Lodge of Research, thank you very much for the invitation. It is truly an honour to be here, and I look forward to having some inquiring minds asking some very well-informed questions. I have to do this because I did set some homework, and I know that you probably hate me for it already, but who here has read the paper? You can put your hands up. Beautiful. All right, at least someone's read. Thank you for half of it. Well, thank you for it. I've been given 45 minutes, which for me is not a very long time, so I'm going to steam through some of the concepts this evening because I want the substance to come out in the discussion that we're going to have post this. But I just want to acknowledge a few people while I have the time, and that's of course Craig Head and Michael Marr, members of the Board of General Purpose. I'd like to thank you very much for taking the time to be here this evening, brethren. Also our District Coordinator, Ian Thompson. Geez, what a great man he is, and it's good to see you here as well. To the Western Street United Lodge and the Brunswick United Lodge, thank you very much to the members who came here to support me. I greatly appreciate it. And lastly, I have to say thank you to Alan Richmond, to whom I dedicated this to in the foreword. He wrote me a foreword actually, and he's been a very big support. Thank you, Alan, for your support. Reverend, I'm going to read, as you can see, they've got the name up there. I'm sure you've all read it by now. Completing our allotted task while yet day. Now, I'm going to do these things. I'm going to present my paper in consumable form. This is going to rely on some of you having read it. And I'm going to talk to this paper. I'm not going to deliver it verbatim, but then I'm going to break my first promise to you. I'm going to read from the beginning of the paper. For thousands of years, man has marvelled at some of the world's greatest natural beauties, many of which have been created through nothing more than the gradual erosion of rock and soil by the elements through the passage of time. The Great Ocean Road's famous 12 Apostles is an example of this. Many thousands of travelling tourists and Victorians have admired the beauty and uniqueness of these fascinating rocks that serve as monuments to the erosive powers of the sea against seemingly invincible stone over time. Like the sea, the passage of time and its accompanying changes in culture and human development can be erosive to institutions that, like stone or rock, stand still against the elements of change that inevitably occur. Returning to that fine metaphor, if I say so myself, of the 12 Apostles, although the passage of time has had an inevitably erosive impact on institutions that stand still, such erosion has the potential to reveal important underlying weaknesses, whilst also enabling the stone to take on a new form and beauty. Erosion, no matter how revealing, as has been shown by the fate of at least 5 apostles, can reveal the subject's ultimate demise and therefore should not be lightly overlooked. Freemasonry, like the 12 apostles, has undoubtedly stood tall against the passage of time, which despite its erosive effect, has revealed both its significant weaknesses in face of the 21st century society that we live in, and some of its more admirable and inviolable beauties that can underpin its adaptation and future strength. Brethren, the core purpose of this paper is to analyse and discuss what exactly has been the contents of the cultural and historical change that has inevitably eroded the institutional pillars of Freemasonry in the Western world, and to set out, in my opinion, the principles that should guide the fraternity in its mission to remain relevant in the lives of modern man. The short title of this paper has been aptly named Completing Our Allotted Task While It Is Yet Day. Any reader, learned in the ritual and symbolic practices of craft Freemasonry, would be able to discern that this title has been adapted from the revered charge entitled The Emblems of Mortality. The author is of the view that, like our own inevitable mortality, Freemasonry is not immune from the frailties of human civilization and is by no means necessarily destined to be perpetually relevant in the lives of man. As such, as the living and breathing custodians of the craft and its traditions, it is our duty, brethren, to accept the reality of Freemasonry's mortality and to make it our task, whilst the light of the craft still shines in the lives of man to ensure that it continues to prosper and benefit and for the benefit of future generations. That's an extract from my opening intro, which I've covered in the slides here, and I hope that it really paints what I'm trying to do. Brethren, I'm not going to stand here tonight to give you a historical lecture on why we're here now, why we're suffering the things that we do. I want to focus on the future. And tonight I'm going to highlight the 4 greatest challenges we face. And in the second part, I'm going to highlight some of my proposed, what I call principal pillars, to provide solutions to a craft that's going to be relevant for the 100 years to come. Now, you can see the 4 things up there, and we're going to rush through them because I have the DC eyeing me off. I want to make sure that I stick to the time requirements. So, I've entitled part 1, A Changing World for an Inviolable Craft. And the first chapter of the paper is A Changing Role of Women and Its Impact on the Role and Identity of the 21st Century Man. Brethren, this is an example of where we're at. In the USA, for example, the average years of labour force participation for women between the ages of 20 and 60 has increased astronomically. You can see in 1960 it's around about 12%, and we're looking up there, 2010, it's around about 25. An incredible, incredible change. Let me show you what's happened here in Australia. Look at that. Look at the change we've had over those years. It's at a point now where Australia has 52% in 1990, up to 59%. Now you might think that 7% is a small increment, but that's a huge increment. And if you look over historical trends, the changing role of women in the workforce has been indicative of what has really been a huge cultural shift in not only the way we organise families, but the ways in which society views itself and its prism in society. So brethren, look at this. This is Australia. It's a big shot, huge increase. So what can help us explain and better understand this massive change in female economic participation and its consequences in modern society? Well, I'm relying on Goldscheider's theory. This is an academic paper, brethren. This paper is not relying on masonic authorities, this is relying on academic authorities, proven authorities. And Goldscheider is a great example. Goldscheider provides a practical theory, and his theory of what has happened with the role of women in society is not tarnished by a political philosophy, but rather it focuses on the economics. And he calls it gender revolution theory, because he's talking about the astronomical change that's occurred in the economic lives of women after the late 60s through to now, and its impacts on families and society. So I've used Goldscheider's gender revolution theory as the prism through which my analysis is conducted. Now, the paper analyses the impact of gender revolution has had in the following areas. The impact it has had on the family unit, particularly as it relates to the role of men and fathers. The impact on man's role as an economic provider, and the impact of our modern understanding of what gender roles are. Let's look into these. Now, the family structure is highly influential. Every politician, lawyer, economist, you name it, they will talk about families, because at the bedrock of Australian society is the family unit. And that might take its form as a nuclear family or a traditional family, but in today's society, couple-bearing families are the core bedrock of what it is in the Australian economy and Australian society more generally. So naturally, as Freemasons, we're going to be affected by this. And in fact, brethren, we actually have a disproportionate amount of families and couple-bearing families than compared to the general population. You'll see Freemasons Victoria's own research indicates that we are above the national average in terms of married and de facto or widowed families, which is indicative of the fact that we have in the US, for example, 73% of brethren are married and 70% of those relationships are childbearing. So it's an incredible situation. So the implications is, think about this, the changes that have happened to families in society because of the change of women is happening to a larger degree in Freemasonry, because we are more reliant on the family unit than any other unit in society. So I want you to take that into consideration. Let's get some terms right. What is traditional marriage? Now, the characteristics of traditional marriage, and we're talking marriage before the gender revolution. This is where men were the sole economic providers, females' roles were sort of stuck to domestic affairs, and I've called them master there, they'd probably take that as a bit of a compliment, but more the point, they're focusing on domestic affairs and childbearing. Males were less involved in the rearing of children after they were born. Remember, my dad used to tell me, "You're my son when you turn 13. I'm sure you've all heard a version of that when you were young. So it was a different world, and significant economic imbalance between husband and wife led to the wife being significantly, substantially economically dependent on the husband, which had a great effect on the retention of marriage. So, what are the changes of marriage because of the gender revolution? Well, today we have a balancing of economic power between male and female partners to marriage. We have a decline in economic dependence-based relationships. Women are not staying with their husbands out of fear of leaving because they'll be impoverished if they leave. We have a substantial change in what it means to be married. The reasons why couples are getting married in the first place and the expectations that you're walking into have changed. Now, men are no longer the breadwinners. I looked at a survey the other day. There are actually ATO statistics suggest that in the medical profession, for example, there is actually a gender pay gap between men and women to the extent of about $60,000. So look where we've come. What an incredible shift that's happened. So the idea of, and this is one industry, obviously, I don't want to generalise, there are inequality in other areas, but there is no doubt that women have gained substantial economic independence. And because of that, women dedicating their time to careers, pursuing those economic interests, fathers are now expected to play a more important role in their child rearing. Now, brethren, all the research suggests that the changes in expectations around parenting is not something that women have come along and imposed. It's actually self-imposed. All the data, all the research suggests that men, modern men today, are actually imposing expectations like this on themselves. They want to be better fathers than their fathers. They want to be more involved in childbearing and rearing. They want to take on this new sort of gender role. Now this sort of highlights what I've said already, which is that women are able to leave with less fear, I should say, not dear, and men being able to divorce with less guilt. That's a quote directly from one of Goldscheider's papers, which I think is very pertinent. Now, I said there was a change in why people get married in the first place. Now, there's always love in these things, but let's face it, families are an economic unit, and they're a very powerful economic unit. And today, they are now primarily being based on the sharing of economic responsibilities and the additional emphasis of the sharing of the domestic and parenting responsibilities. But more importantly, the focus has now become a sharing of the maintenance responsibilities of the relationship. Where previously a man could go off and pursue his self-interest to the detriment of his family, he could get away with it to a large extent, as the data shows, because his partner was substantially economically dependent. What was the option? Leave, divorce, and become impoverished. Become a taboo. With single working women were always seen as a taboo, even my mum's generation. When her father died after World War II, there were heaps of comments made about my grandmother being a single woman. Now, that has changed. The things we used to get away with, not the case anymore. And I don't mean in a sinister way, but the expectations have changed, and we need to factor this in. So we're not going to worry about this. All that basically says is that this is not limited just to relationships where both partners have economic power. Even where people have their wives not working and that they are economically independent, the same rule applies, because what's the difference? If they want to leave and become economically independent, they can, whereas previously they couldn't. So this is affecting all marriages, and I don't want to just use marriages in a pejorative sense, but all relationships, all couple-bearing relationships. So how does this impact us, you say? All this stuff, this great academic theory, Jack, but how does this matter to me? What's in it for us? Well, it makes it harder for men to devote the time and resources necessary to get value out the craft. It increasing female role in determining the use of family discretionary expenditure creates a further hurdle to Masonic membership. 80% of consumer decisions made in the market are made by women. 80% of consumer decisions made in the market are made by women. Let that sink in. Discretionary income is being largely determined by females. And it's not a problem, but it's a reality. And it comes from the fact that growing female economic independence has rightly resulted in females being able to come to the relationship, come to the table and say, I'm going to have a say on how we spend our money. And they're doing it more than they ever have. And I'm not passing any judgment, but it's a reality we're going to have to deal with. Because remember, what are we vying for? Money, time, resources. That's what Freemasonry takes to be a dedicated member. Money, don't pay your money, you get kicked out. Time, you don't get time, you don't get anything out of it, and you'll probably get bored and leave. Resources, energy, ideas, these sorts of things. So that's a rough overview of the topic on women. Chapter 2, changing role of women in society and what I call a new age of decentralised spiritualism and the rejection of dogmatic instruction. Brethren, one of the greatest myths about Freemasonry is that we're a religion or that we are closely associated with institutional religion. And we are clearly not, but that is a misconception out there. I want you to look at this. 60% of Australians identify with a religious affiliation. Now, I know you say that's a majority, but look at this. Including people who identify as having secular or other spiritual beliefs, 30% of people in our society do not identify with institutional religion. And that's up from a whopping 8% in 5 years. Now, age lines are separating this lack of faith or perhaps a lack of identification with institutional religion, with 39% of Australians between the ages of 18 and 34 fitting into that category. Now, I don't need to explain the fact that the requirement of joining Freemasonry is a belief in what?
Supreme being.
Thank you, we'll get to that. This is an idea, nice graphical representation. I mean, look, the Roman Catholics have done it, right? I mean, they've actually grown quite substantially. But as you can see, at the top, you've got you probably can't see the graph, but the yellow and the greeny colour is other religions or no religions, and the purple is not stated or described. So you can see the substantial increase. Now imagine along age lines, that's even more exacerbated. So we're becoming less, and I'm not going to say less religious, we're identifying less with mainstream religion, and that's a reality. Now, this is a great quote. As is demonstrated from that figure I just showed you, there has been a significant increase in the members of the Australian population that do not identify with any religion. This trend away from religious affiliation or practice is said to be representative of a growing secular, postmodern and post-Christian society. However, despite this decline, as suggested by Boomer, who wrote a fantastic book and I suggest you read it, he said, and I quote, "The secularity of the 21st century is not anti-religious or irreligious, with contemporary secularism being better seen as a social condition in which the religious and spiritual have moved out of the control of both the state and church." I don't know how many people of you know much about the English Civil War, but this has happened before, brethren. This idea of moving away from institutionalised religion, idols, to a more personalised spiritualism. That's what's happening. So don't fret. When you see the big sort of column of no religion and all that growing, that doesn't necessarily result in an atheistic society. So what are the consequences of this? Well, where the craft is viewed as a religion or linked to institutional religion, people are going to view us as an antiquated anachronism of the past. Even where people view the craft as desirable, the fraternity's strict requirement for its members to express the belief in supreme being, where expressed in a traditional religious terms, may present prospective members who approach us from proceeding with their membership. Now, where non-religious men, and I can tell you there's probably plenty that you know, join Freemasonry, despite that requirement, they're very difficult to retain because of the misconception that we are linked to institutional religion. Over time, it does result in a degradation of faith in their membership. So we do have an issue. It's an unfortunate issue, but it's an issue nonetheless. So, let's talk about my favourite set of people, which I'm included in this generation, unfortunately, the challenge of the me generation, preparing for members of generational millennial. Now, who are these millennials? Who's heard of millennials? You can put your hand. You've heard of it now, so you should all put your hand up. But the millennials are people born between the years 1982 and the year 2000. Now, in the US, they represent if you segregated people into generations, the largest living generation of citizens. Millennials will make up 54% of surviving Australian population by 2030, which is actually not that far away. And by 2021, they'll command 17% of Australia's retail market. Incredible strength. This generation is coming. Now, don't worry about that. All that basically says is millennials, luckily, the problem has been identified already for us by employers. Employers have put hundreds of millions of dollars into research in how they can integrate this generation of people into their workplaces. Because I'm telling you, they're difficult to integrate. And I'm going to explain to you why. Now, we're going to watch a video.
What's the millennial question?
Apparently, millennials as a generation, which is a group of people who were born approximately 1984 and after, are tough to manage. And they're accused of being entitled and narcissistic and self-interested, unfocused, lazy. But entitled is the big one. And because they confound leadership so much, what's happening is leaders are asking the millennials, what do you want? And millennials are saying, we want to work in a place with purpose, love that. We want to make an impact, whatever that means. We want free food and beanbags. And so somebody articulates some sort of purpose, there's lots of free food and there's beanbags, and yet for some reason, they're still not happy. And that's because they're missing, there's a missing piece. What I've learned is that I can break it down into 4 pieces, right? There are four things, 4 characteristics. One is parenting, the other one is technology, the third is impatience, and the fourth is environment. The generation that we call the millennials, too many of them grew up subject to, not my words, failed parenting strategies, where, for example, they were told that they were special all the time. They were told that they could have anything they want in life, just because they want it, right? They were told, some of them got into honors classes, not because they deserved it, but because their parents complained. And some of them got A's, not because they earned them, but because the teachers didn't want to deal with the parents. Some kids got participation medals. You got a medal for coming in last, right? Which the science we know is pretty clear, which is it devalues the medal and the reward for those who actually work hard. And it actually makes the person who comes in last feel embarrassed because they know they didn't deserve it. So it actually makes them feel worse, right? So you take this group of people and they graduate school and they get a job and they're thrust into the real world, and in an instant they find out they're not special, their moms can't get them a promotion, that you get nothing for coming in last, and by the way, you can't just have it because you want it, right? And in an instant, their entire self-image is shattered. And so you have an entire generation that's growing up with lower self-esteem than previous generations. The other problem, to compound it, is we're growing up in a Facebook, Instagram world. In other words, we're good at putting filters on things. We're good at showing people that life is amazing even though I'm depressed, right? And so everybody sounds tough, and everybody sounds like they got it all figured out. And the reality is there's very little toughness, and most people don't have it figured out. And so when the more senior people say, well, what should we do? They sound like, this is what you got to do. And they have no clue, right? So you have an entire generation growing up with lower self-esteem than previous generations, right? Through no fault of their own, right? They were dealt a bad hand, right? Now let's add in technology. We know that engagement with social media and our cell phones releases a chemical called dopamine. That's why when you get a text, it feels good, right? So we've all had it where you're feeling a little bit down or feeling a bit lonely, and so you send out 10 texts to 10 friends, hi, 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 because it feels good when you get a response, right? Right? It's why we count the likes. It's why we go back 10 times to see if my Instagram is growing slower. Did I do something wrong? Do they not like me anymore? Right? The trauma for young kids to be unfriended, right? Because we know when you get a hit of dopamine, which feels good. It's why we like it. It's why we keep going back to it. Dopamine is the exact same chemical that makes us feel good when we smoke, when we drink, and when we gamble. In other words, it's highly, highly addictive. Right? We have age restrictions on smoking, gambling, and alcohol, and we have no age restrictions on social media and cell phones, which is the equivalent of opening up the liquor cabinet and saying to our teenagers, hey, by the way, this adolescence thing, if it gets you down. But that's basically what's happening. Right? That's basically what happened. You have an entire generation that has access to an addictive, numbing chemical called dopamine through social media and cell phones as they're going through the high stress of adolescence. Why is this important? Almost every alcoholic discovered alcohol when they were teenagers. When we're very, very young, the only approval we need is the approval of our parents. And as we go through adolescence, we make this transition where we now need the approval of our peers. Very frustrating for our parents, very important for us. It allows us to acculturate outside of our immediate families into the broader tribe. right? It's a highly, highly stressful and anxious period of our lives, and we're supposed to learn to rely on our friends. Some people, quite by accident, discover alcohol and numbing effects of dopamine to help them cope with the stresses and anxieties of adolescence. Unfortunately, that becomes hardwired in their brains, and for the rest of their lives, when they suffer significant stress, they will not turn to a person, they will turn to the bottle. Social stress, financial stress, career stress, that's pretty much the primary reasons why an alcoholic drinks, right? What's happening is, because we're allowing unfettered access to these dopamine-producing devices and media, basically it's becoming hardwired, and what we're seeing is as they grow older, too many kids don't know how to form deep, meaningful relationships. Their words, not mine. They will admit that many of their friendships are superficial. They will admit that their friends, that they don't count on their friends, they don't rely on their friends, they have fun with their friends, but they also know that their friends will cancel on them if something better comes along. Deep, meaningful relationships are not there because they never practice the skill set, and worse, they don't have the coping mechanisms to deal with stress.
Now, here's some historical events that have influenced the millennial generation. There was a re-emphasis in about the late 90s. There was a bit of a move towards the importance of families and children. Now, reasonably interesting statistics have shown that that's had an impact on their view of the world. Also, we've had what we've called failed parenting strategy. I don't mean that in an offensive way, but that's what the psychologists call it, which has resulted in millennials growing up having micromanaged schedules. They had everything planned. The school they're going to go to, the karate club, the soccer club, everything they had from the moment of their birth was planned. Micromanaged, which led to them experiencing, and the psychologists have reported, serious stress akin to that of an adult working a full-time job. And the other thing that's been dangerous, we've had what was called the parent advocate. Now, if you made a mistake at school, how many of your parents would call up the school to complain that it was unfair? Can I see a raising of hands? Yes, that's because not many of you are millennials. That's what's happening. Kids are getting into honours classes not because they deserve it, but because their parents complain. They're getting jobs or interviews because their parents are complaining. They've got what's called the parent advocate. Now, you can love your kid, but sometimes you have to let the poor bugger go off into society and experience the challenges we all had to experience. Now, why, do you ask? Resilience, self-reliance, independence, character building. That is what the skills have been denied to these kids because of what psychologists called failed parenting strategies. And also, don't forget, we live in a growing globalised world, so there's an expectation now. They've been going to schools with all different people of all different races and cultures and religions. The expectation now is that people want diversity. They expect it, they demand it, and unfortunately they get into the workforce and realise something very different. And also, we've had global conflict and political terrorism. Now, you can imagine that the impact it's had on you guys, let alone the kids growing up in that period. This is what they've been told by their parents and educators from birth, and you're going to laugh at some of this. They've been told they're smart and special and unique. This has been reinforced by parenting education that's catered to millennials' every need, closely guided their attainment of their personal pursuits. They never had to do anything by themselves. That inclusiveness and diversity are important core personal values. The millennials should rely on and expect tolerance and diversity between groups in society. This is important, that they could rely not on themselves, but a lifelong interdependence on family, friends and teachers. They're always told, you're not going to be alone, you'll always have a shoulder to lean on. And they've never been given the opportunity to go off and experience what it's like to fight for themselves. Now, they were told they're the achiever generation. They had to do well at school. They were pressured. They were told about the importance of success. And as I said, they had micromanaged schedules. And more importantly, which actually is quite complementary to Freemasonry, they were told they had to have a strong belief in community service. They had to walk towards higher values and move towards a higher purpose. Problem with millennials, they don't know what that is. And all the research has demonstrated that hasn't translated well. Now, what are millennial characteristics? Now, if you notice any of this in me, I apologise. Large sense of outward confidence and sense of entitlement, where millennials typically hold strong views that they're able to achieve and overcome challenges and go to great heights without in their personal or professional life, unbound by the normative cultural restrictions of age and experience. This is counterbalanced by the fact that the millennials are being proven to be the most self-conscious group of people. Suicide rates amongst millennials is huge. It's an epidemic, it's a problem. Rates of anxiety, depression at record levels. There are universities in crisis mode because of these mental health statistics. It's horrible. Goal-orientated, achievement-driven, we've said that, and also they want to strive for a sense of purpose and they prefer group leadership. We've covered all this, but you get the idea, the challenges we're going to face. So, moving on from millennials. Last topic, of course, technology. Now, there are people in this room who will have seen the good old days where when you went outside, well, when you were on the weekend, you had nothing to do, you went outside and played ball. And you had friends. You actually had to speak to people, believe it or not. Today, it's a very different story. I want to paint the picture. Look at this. We can't really just blame young people. The adults are getting on board as well. Look who's online. 93% of young people are online. People between the ages of 30 and 49, 81%. Adults, 50 to 64%. And people over the age of 65, 38%. Does anyone here know the average age of Freemasonry in Victoria?
64. 69.
Gone up. There you go. So where are we? We're down here. Now, huge effects. 48% of younger society citizens use the internet and digital technology to acquire consumer goods. This is up from 31% only 18 years ago. Huge increase. And it's expected to increase exponentially by 2020. 62% or 2/3 of young internet users consume their news, their events, their politics, their through digital media platforms. And 73% of today's teenagers use social media or networking platforms regularly, which is substantial. So we have a society of young people that are mainly online. They're getting their news online, they're buying their products online, they live in this digital space, which obviously has some significant consequences. Now, this is the consequences. Young people, and I have to say people between the age of 30 to 49, have developed what's called a desire for instant self-gratification. We want everything now. We don't go to the movies and wait for movie times anymore. We don't wait in line. If I want to watch something, I'll pay for it, it'll be instantly downloaded. I want to purchase something, I'll go on eBay, it'll be delivered to me in the next 2 days if I pay enough money. We've moved away from this idea of patience, of acquiring things through time, through respect, for this idea of working towards something, to just being able to click a button and getting it straight away. Now, it's very convenient, especially on the weekend when you want to watch your Netflix or TV shows, but it's resulted in a huge impact on the way we have our expectations shaped. Also, as I said, we have underdeveloped social skills. We can't talk to each other anymore. We can't build meaningful relationships. And that is obviously a huge problem, which has many unintended consequences. So I've told you all the problems. I've painted this dark picture of a very depressing 21st century. But, brethren, my motto usually is, I don't make a challenge without providing a solution. And these are the principal pillars to meet the challenges of the gender revolution. So I wanted to cast your mind back to the stuff I was speaking about women. Here's some solutions that I'm going to suggest. Don't worry about that. That basically just recaps the fact that women have changed, families have changed, expectations have changed, and we've got to deal with it. Now, principle pillar 1. The craft must put women at the forefront of a male member's decision to join Freemasonry and ensure they are essential partners in their husband's ongoing development and membership. What do I mean by that? That means, brethren, no longer can a person join Freemasonry on a whim. Females and wives and partners are playing a more important role in the use of budgets, discretionary expenditure, decision-making, and also commitment, time commitment. We have an obligation to bring them along for the journey. We need to make sure, our lodges need to make sure, that if we are approaching someone to join Freemasonry or they're approaching us, that it's a package deal, that we understand that you're not recruiting him, you're recruiting his family. Because this can no longer be just something we do. It has to be accepting the reality that we need to bring females along for the journey. And that means by making sure that they have a vested interest in their husband's success in Freemasonry. And there's a few things we can do to achieve that. Give women and families and prospective members the option to be part of the joining process by running information sessions for women and families and prospective members so they can learn about the craft and its tangible and intangible benefits. Tell them what it is so they know what their husbands are getting into. I mean, if they find out 6 months later, it's too late. You'll lose a member. You probably pay capitation fees for them for a couple of years before they get excluded. It's better to get them on board as soon as you can. How about when we conduct interviews, we're not just conducting interviews with the candidate alone, we're also doing it in the presence of their wives and interested family. I know lodges do this, but believe it or not, there's a lot who don't. Why don't we include existing partners and families of Freemasons on committees of inquiry? If we accept the fact we're not just recruiting them anymore, it's a package deal, Why aren't we getting some of our strongest advocates, and I know people who have gone in the chair would be able to say this, our partners are our biggest advocates for what we do in the craft because they see the tangible benefits we get. Why aren't they involved in selling that message? I think they should be. Now, let's give partners and wives, if they so choose, a chance to be really meaningfully involved in the lodge committee system and have a vested interest in ensuring the lodge works, their partners are happy, and the results that they've joined for are being achieved. And let's bring them in to our culture. I'm not just saying, the odd social event or the ladies' nights, which probably is an antiquated idea now, but heading in that direction. Let's try and get women feeling as though they belong to something as well. I promise you, if they feel invested, their husbands will stick around for a lot longer. And like I said at the bottom, as a bit of a disclaimer, these lists aren't exhaustive. The principles are what's important. If you can think of another way to implement it, go for it. Principle pillar 2. The craft must be compatible with and better suited for families, particularly a man's modern roles of father and husband. Now, skipping through this, because I'm conscious of the time, we'll get to the principal pillars to give you an idea of what I'm talking about here. Now, we need to make sure that Freemasonry is more compatible with changing family life, changing demands on times, and changing interests of fathers who want to play a more active role in their child's childhood. These are some suggestions. We need to clearly define and better sell to people what it is to get into office. No more tiptoeing, brethren. We can't just sort of say, yeah, take it on, you'll be fine, it's nothing. We can't do that anymore. We've got to be upfront, we've got to be clear, we've got to be professional, we've got to be honest. And if we are honest, we will ensure that people only take on commitments they can take on, and we prevent people from feeling as though once they get into office, they're obligated to do something they can't do, in which they'll develop a sense of shame if they can't deliver it, and they'll leave. That's why they're leaving. They're ashamed. They feel like they've failed you. Now, the other thing is we need to ensure that we adapt our officers so they're cross-skilled. We rely, Freemason, we rely on too little groups of people to do too much. We're stretched. And people get away with it because we have this system where people ride on the coattails of others. We can't have that. If we're going to have officers, sure, they need to serve in their office as much as they can, but on the night when the junior warden can't get there, the lodge can't collapse. We have to cross-skill our officers. We have to be more flexible. We have to be more targeted and adaptive to circumstances and challenges we meet. Our system at the moment is not doing that, and it's resulting in failing strategies. Also, we must be better at identifying Masonic leadership. We must identify our leaders in our lodges early. We must be upfront and honest with them, and we've got to help them achieve their goals. And I promise you, if we do that early and we plan and we're clear, they will get involved, they will contribute, and they will understand that their contribution is going to be respected. Now, principle pillar 3. The craft must empower women and partners of families, Freemasons, to value and understand the tangible and intangible benefits that flow to them. Basically, if we're making better men, we're making better husbands, we're making better fathers. We need to tell them that, we need to be clear about that, and we need to communicate that better. Principle pillar 4. The craft must be a positive experience for its members. It can provide purpose and reassurance. I haven't said anything about women joining Freemasonry, you would have noticed. I haven't taken that step. You know why? Because we are more relevant now than we've ever been. The identity of man is in crisis. They need us to be the standard bearers of masculinity in society. We have a duty to ensure that men can come to us and feel a sense of purpose and identity. Being a man today is a dangerous experience on university campuses. Being a white man is particularly dangerous. And I can tell you now, people are crying out for respect. Respect. What is this thing we take for granted? Respect and trust. And who provides it? Rotary? No, I don't think so. Political parties? No, forget about it. Universities don't do it. Who? We do it. We do, to quote The Simpsons. Our organisation. So we must embrace that and take it forward. And we can do that whilst balancing our need to respect women in a better way. Now, this is a test I propose, something we should very much implement. The net positive benefit test sounds a bit legalistic, but this basically says every member should have a net positive experience. They should get something out of it. They should enjoy it more than they hate it. It's a very easy concept to understand. But I don't think we think about this when we do lodge programs. We're worried about, oh, we need to do this because if we don't do this, this is going to happen, or this is going to happen, or bad things are going to happen. Let's take a step back. Think about it. Is what we're doing providing a net positive benefit? If it's not, I suggest to you, brethren, it's not worth doing. It's akin to lodge suicide. Now, let's talk about religion. I've already explained to you what the problem is, and this is my first solution. The craft must dispel any community misconceptions or belief that Freemasonry is a religion, or that is closely associated with part of the religious establishment. Now, I'm not saying that we say we're irreligious and lie to people and say we have no religious underpinnings. There's a difference between religion and institutions that perpetuate religion. I'm talking Catholic Church, the Anglican Church, these institutions. If we anchor ourselves to them, we're going to end up in the same fate. And I can promise you that young people, the generation that's coming, are not going to tolerate it. They're not going to give us a look in. And we need to say that we are not religion. We're broader than religion. We offer more than religion. We offer something that is about your journey in a subjective sense. There's no dogma, there's values, but it's open to your subjective interpretation. So we must do that, brethren. And that's some principal pillars to give effect to it. Principal pillar 2, the craft must design a contemporary expression of our religious test for membership that is more clearly defined, so as to not alienate a significantly less religious yet spiritual, younger and future membership. Now, I've mentioned here the charges of Freemasons where it says that if you're a stupid atheist, you can't be a Freemason. We all know that's antiquated. We all know that that's a symbolic expression. And in fact, Freemasons Victoria agrees with me because they only mention the requirement for a belief in a supreme being. It's not in the Constitution. It's actually in Article 217, which refers to Form A, which in Form A it says it. So even Freemasons Victoria doesn't have a set article that sets out that you need to have a belief in a supreme being. It says it there in a form. It's an administrative clause. Now, let's talk about the supreme being test. The test appears to be that candidates for initiation must declare a belief in a supreme being. The Oxford English Dictionary definition of what the phrase supreme being is there's a reference to a name of God. Now, whilst it's not my contention that the requirement for a candidate for initiation to have a belief in a higher power should be removed, I do submit that the expression of that requirement in the form of a supreme being test creates challenges in light of our current society. One can't but help ask rhetorically, does our current religious test simply ask candidates to declare a belief in insert relevant name of God here? And if that is so, are we therefore restricting participation to Freemasonry only to those who participate in institutional and organised religion? It's a rhetorical question. The utilisations of the word supreme being unnecessarily restricts our membership to those men who belong to organised religion, or at the very least may be perceived by someone who is going to join that they need to have that requirement. It's a misconception, and I can assure you, perception is reality. Keep that in mind. Good luck convincing someone of something if they have a strong belief the other way. Therefore, any test for religiosity needs to be applied to new and future members should be sufficiently broad enough to capture their interests without compromising our ancient landmarks. So I propose the higher power test. Now you're probably thinking, Jack, you're getting lost in semantics here, but I'm a lawyer, I'm allowed to. The term higher power refers to a spiritual being such as, like, similar, akin, that has a great power, strength, knowledge, etc., that can affect nature and the lives of people. This term by definition is clearly broader, and I think it's a more contemporary expression of our ancient landmarks and it should be adopted. Now, principle pillar 3, internally, the craft must analyse and make clearer to its membership why its ceremonial practices are based in the Abrahamic religion, but is not of itself an expression or imposition of Abrahamic religious practices or dogma. Now, I say in the bottom paragraph there, despite the differences between the three major religions, and we're talking Judaism, Islam and Christianity, they unquestionably share near identical origins, being all institutions of religion that claim descent from the practices of the ancient Israelites from the worship of the God of Abraham. Therefore, it would be difficult to conclude that the influence and practice of the Abrahamic tradition within our crafts, ritual and ceremonies is anything other than significant. So I'm not sitting here and saying, well, brethren, it doesn't exist. It is clearly a big part of what we do. But the point is, just because we use Abrahamic practices to express our moral teachings doesn't mean we are of ourselves an Abrahamic institution. Doesn't mean that we're actually existing for the purpose of making people subscribe to that religious dogma. We use it as a vehicle to spread what I would consider to be secular values. Now, moving on from that, Yes, moving on from that. Here's some practical examples, practical recommendations that I suggest. Grand lodges and lodges need to be better educated about, need to better educate the membership about the fact that we're not just another Christian organisation. What we need to talk about is the fact that Freemasonry embodies principles of the Enlightenment, political pluralism, secularism, the idea that we vote for a master in lodge, the idea that we have the capacity to express our ideas in a free and fair environment. We embody a number of traditions, brethren. We should be proud of those traditions, and we should be clear to ensure that brethren know that when they join the craft, they are joining a school of thought that goes across a number of traditions and is not simply just another place to worship Christianity. Now, let's look at the millennial generation. I am going to hinge my first pillar here off the back of some substantial research that has been done by employers into how they integrate and better manage millennials.
I'm excited to be sitting here with Kristen Hadid. Kristen, I met her when she was 21 years old. She just won an award for Female Entrepreneur of the Year and was invited to attend a dinner that I was at. And we got to talking, and she was telling me some of the things that she was doing to build the culture of her company, and I was blown away. She knew more about how to build a culture than many of the more seasoned entrepreneurs that I'd met in my career. Over the years, I've continued to learn from Kristen about how to build a culture, and I'm really excited because she's joining the Start With Why team. She understands better than most, I think, how to help millennials become the leaders that they can become. Very often I get asked about millennials. They seem to confound a lot of leaders, but you've had great success leading millennials. Tell me a little bit about sort of what success you found and what lessons you've learned.
I realized before we ever get to cleaning, we've got to teach our employees the skills that are critical for their success to lead our world one day. And so at Student Made, all of our training it revolves around teaching them things like recognition and confrontation, how to give it and receive it, how to build relationships, how to handle feedback, how to problem solve on the job. And so when they graduate and move on, they're confident problem solvers, they can build a relationship, and they can lead our world, they're better equipped.
What are some of the unique challenges that you have faced leading this young generation?
Well, I think the first is technology has really changed the way that we build our relationships. So at Student Made, we don't text. Everything is face-to-face, on the phone if we absolutely have to, but we really try to build that interaction so that when our students leave, they know how to build meaningful relationships. We're very upfront from day one. You know, you're not going to like it here maybe at first. It's going to be uncomfortable. We're going to be pushing you outside of your comfort zone, but you're going to leave better than when you came in, and you're going to be equipped to lead our world. And so that's why they buy into what we're doing.
It's remarkable, and it's the only company I've heard of that actually takes it to that level. One of the big challenges I hear about is that no matter what leaders try, it doesn't seem to connect with the millennials, with the millennial generation. Even if it's well intended, sometimes they react negatively to some of the strategies that you've tried. It takes time. How have you been able to sort of bridge that divide?
Well, I think as leaders, it's our responsibility to create a space for our people to be successful. And so that requires understanding what do they need to be successful. In our company, we're investing in them knowing that they're moving on. But then on the millennial side, it's being open to that learning and that growth. I think it's just that we aren't used to being in a place where that is the priority. And when we come in on the first day and we are told, you're going to be successful because you worked here. We're gonna teach you what you need to thrive. We just need you to be open. That sets a whole different tone, and we're open to that. And that's how I think we can come together.
Now, there is a person in the Harvard Business Review, Meister and Williard wrote the following, and this is what employers are adopting. These 4 strategies of mentorship are recruiting, retaining employees, and providing a very, very effective experience despite the negative character traits that millennials exhibit. And there they are: reverse mentoring, group mentoring, anonymous mentoring, and mentoring with microfeedback. Reverse mentoring is a wonderful, wonderful thing. It's where you take the top of the organisation, get them to sit down with the junior side of the organisation, and get the junior person to teach something to the older person, or the more senior person they don't get. And it's pretty easy today. If I sit down and teach you how to use Facebook, which I hope you never asked me to do because I'm pretty useless at it as well. It's an example of a breaking down of the hierarchical differences, which in workplaces has enabled senior management to be more acquainted with their junior staff, and junior staff who exhibit those millennial characteristics to feel as though they're being respected, listened to and taken seriously, which has led to retention of employees, better performance in work, and all these other great things that you can expect from those circumstances. That's reverse mentoring. Group mentoring. I think we do a lot of this as well. And there's a great example here of what British Telecom has done. But I'll first say that group mentoring uses technology, a technological platform, to enable people to provide peer-to-peer feedback. Now, this approach has been highly effective in employee organisations. British Telecom found that 78% of its employees preferred to learn from their peers. Now, they've used a digital platform called Dare to Share. This platform allows employees to engage in social collaboration, pass on knowledge, give tips, insight, experiences, all through a forum. And that process has been very powerful because instead of saying, oh God, I don't know the answer, I should go to the boss, they can go up to Lewis and say, Lewis, I've got this problem, have you faced it? Yeah, I've faced it before. Here's my experiences. And I know you can all see how this applies to Freemasonry. Sometimes we're scared to ask senior members what we think or the worries or concerns we have because we're worried about making a fool of ourselves. But this group mentoring approach has been very powerful, and I think it's something we should implement. This is the most intriguing to me, and I propose we implement this in the first 18 months of a Brothers membership. And that is a situation where we have mentors paired up through a technological platform, might be a chat or email, we could use email, where they actually don't know who each other are. And that enables a frank, honest, transparent relationship to build, where they're paired on a basic personality test that pairs mutual interests, which has been highly effective in workplaces. In fact, I've read some of the research of this study that has indicated that they've had people in New Zealand anonymously mentoring people in the United States based on a personality test, and they've actually found that the retention rate on the other side has been huge, and they've actually built meaningful relationships to the point where people have been actually mourning, they've been sad when they've lost that mentor relationship at the end of the 18-month period because the connection it builds. And the anonymity is very important because it enables trust and confidence to be built without fear of personality or biases or these sorts of things. It's a very effective strategy, it's something we should look at doing. And microfeedback. Believe it or not, millennials like to be told all the time how they're going. They need constant reassurance. They can't reassure themselves because they're never taught how to do it. Remember, they got participation medals for coming last, and they were told they were special when they did the wrong thing, and all these wonderful things. So they need constant feedback. And in this sense, this company, and this is Chameleon Solutions, they've been using a system that only allows you to write in 140 characters, so very short feedback that's instantly delivered and can only be responded to with, once again, 140 characters, very short response. This has had great positive impacts on employees, and in fact has actually taught millennials how to not react emotionally when they get offended, and to think things through and to carefully word their responses, which naturally results in growth and development. So it's been very, very effective in the workplace. So I just suggest that Grand Lodge should implement it, and even put Grand Lodge to one side, our lodges should do it, and we can do it, and we have no excuse if we don't do it. Mentoring such a big gap in Freemasonry, we've got the systems, employees have done the work for us, they've spent the millions of dollars. Let's use their systems, let's make it work. So we must ensure that we've got this class of people who are highly ambitious, who are impatient, who want things now. We have to make that work in Freemasonry, which is inevitably a lifelong journey that takes a very, very, very long time to achieve. You probably never achieve half your aspirations because Freemasonry is not designed for instant gratification. So what we need to do is we need to get these people who are highly ambitious, mentor them and support them, and give them opportunities to go through their Masonic journey with small targets. They need to be sat down and coached. They need to be able to aim for small achievements over their Masonic journey if we are to retain them. If we leave them to their own devices, as employers have shown, they'll lose direction, they'll lose interest, they'll leave. We've had stories from employers where people have worked 12 years of their life getting into the top firms in Canada, and they're in a situation where they're there for 6 months and they leave. And they say, why are you leaving? You've worked, I don't know, I can't find that sense of purpose. I've got no direction, I feel lost. And that's what's happening to our members in Freemasonry. We're just bringing them in and saying, off you go, have fun. We can't do that, brethren. We've got to help them through the journey. We've got to set targets. I know you're all rolling your eyes saying, why do we have to do this? Well, my job isn't to pass judgment on the reality. My job is to accept the reality and propose some solutions. Principle pillar 3. We must ensure that we move away from a hierarchical structure that's based on age and longevity of membership towards a model that is meritorious, rewarding talent, hard work, achievement and effort. Freemasonry must ensure that millennials feel they're being taken seriously and their perspectives respected. Brethren, let's face it, our organisation rewards longevity of membership. Doesn't reward skill, doesn't reward industry, although we say that in our ritual. We have to move away from that. This idea of just because you're around for long enough means that certain accolades you're entitled to. And that's not to say that people who have been around don't contribute. Of course they do. But what about the guy who comes in, he's a member of a lodge that's struggling, gets on a committee, runs an event, recruits members and keeps them? What recognition do we give him? You can feel free to chuck in an answer. No, I don't think we do. We don't do it. We don't do it. We've got this system, this approach where age and experience is seen through the prism of membership rather than the contribution of that. We move away from that. So that's the principal pillars for that. This is going to quickly be technology. I'm just going to breeze through this. My point is that we need to reimagine what Freemasonry is. Freemasonry is more than lodge meetings, brethren. Sorry that if I'm breaking some news here, but members are not joining Freemasonry to hear the minutes read out, although I get excited about them, or the Treasury report, or the planning committee. I love the planning committee, but people my age don't join for that reason. They're joining because they want friendship, mentorship, leadership skills, personal development, spiritual engagement, a third place away from work and family that they can bolster their credentials as a man in a modern society that's troubled and chaotic. So we need to say to people, sure, go to your lodge meetings. If you don't get to your lodge meeting, it's not the end of the world. Have you read a Masonic book this month? Yes. Well, that's Freemasonry. You've participated. Have you gone to a virtual lodge meeting? Yeah, I did that. That's Freemasonry. I listened to a podcast and I learned something about the first degree. Well, it's Freemasonry. I read one of Fred Shade's many papers. It's Freemasonry. I always read your papers, Fred. So we need to reimagine what it is. What is Freemasonry? Now, if Freemasonry is limited to what we do in the lodge room, brethren, we're destined to fail. Not to say that what we do in the lodge room is a problem or a bad thing, but in reality, people are looking to diversify their experience. We must provide that. One of the biggest issues we have with Freemasonry is we overpromise and underdeliver. I sat down with a guy yesterday, I caught up with him from lunch, he's from Allen's, which is a big law firm, and I said, what do you want to join for? And he said to me, I'm really looking for personal development. He goes, what about your lodge? Should I join your lodge? Does it do that? And I hesitated. I'd like to think it does that. I hope it does that. I can't guarantee it does. And we overpromise and underdeliver. Think about these things. So I suggest that we need to re-envisage what it means to participate in Freemasonry. We need to become more integrated. We need technology to become a more integrated aid in the practice of the craft. This is going to happen over time, but small things, brethren, like if you've got email, you should get your notes papers on email. All right, we spend too much money on postage, which is going up as a rip-off, printing, these sorts of things. We need to have systems that update people electronically. We need to go where the people are. You've already seen the evidence. Everyone is on their device. Unfortunately, I haven't got it on me, thank God, but they live on their phones. We need to go where they are if we're going to get their attention and keep them. So, pretty basic. Let's use that tool to counter the negative consequences and make it an aid to our recruitment and retention. Next, lodges must be sanctuaries for the development of interpersonal skills, meaningful relationships, self-confidence. If it was up to me, it would be a rule that you cannot take your mobile phone into lodge. And it should be that way. Well, they do. I've seen people on, who knows what Tinder is? It's a dating app. I've seen someone on Tinder in the lodge room once before. Ridiculous. It shouldn't happen, because Freemasonry should be the place where they get to put their phone away and not think about work and come together and build those interpersonal skills that we're talking about. And brethren, we must continue to be that sanctuary, and we must never let technology become a tool that overrides that. It's an aid, but it's not to take over the culture that we foster, which is a place of self-confidence and interpersonal skills. So, brethren, I'm just going to read you a very small thing from the conclusion, then I'll open to questions. I've probably broken the rule, Brendan, I'm very sorry. Everyone's still awake, and so am I, so that's always a positive. But I'll just read you my conclusions. I think it sums up what I'm trying to say. It is easy when discussing changes in time and culture to become pessimistic, fearful, or apprehensive about the future. Indeed, the times to which we are currently subjected represent some of the greatest and most tumultuous periods of change and development in human history. The world has become almost unrecognisable to older generations, and a place of significant anxiety and discomfort to those who the fate has handed the responsibility of its future leadership. The seas of change have beat heavily against the institutional pillars of rock over time that have provided ourselves and our forefathers a sense of confidence, spirit and power necessary to create the civilizations we know and love. Scientists predict that within the next 2 centuries, all of the magnificent 12 apostles that stand against the slow erosion of the sea will be gone. These natural pillars of rock and beauty that have inspired many will no longer be able to be enjoyed by the natural eye. Rather, they will become footnotes in history, enshrined in the digital pixels of forgotten photographs, silently fading from the memory of human civilization. This resigned fate attributable to the 12 apostles does not have to be Freemasonry's own inevitable destiny. Our craft, like the limestone of the 12 apostles, is built on the institutional pillars that exist in the minds and hearts of its members, to which time may only erode if its custodians lose sight of its inevitable destiny. As members of ancient, free and accepted Masonry, we, and we alone, have the power to shape the craft and its future. Despite all the change, challenges and disruption that may act as hurdles in the path of our future growth, our craft is more relevant now than it has ever been. Our young and future members will need the craft to continue to be the bastion of light, hope and perfection in human society that it has been since its early and established practice in history. We must not, ever, lose sight of our duty, not only to preserve and maintain the craft in the memory of our past members, in memory of our past members and its legacy, but our young and future members and men in society generally, to ensure we remain relevant in the 21st century. This will mean that we have to be prepared to face the realities that attach to the significant challenges of the changing role of women in society, the decline in our fellow citizenry's religiosity, the unique changes of the next generation of members who are millennials, and the disruptive role that technological development has caused in our day-to-day experiences. Bravery, ingenuity, hope, vision and unity will need to be the driving force behind our efforts in the short to medium term if we are to achieve the adaptation and change necessary to see our craft last from generation to generation. The time is ours, the opportunities are endless, and in the author's most humble and passionate submission, the future is bright. We only need to see it happen. Freemasonry is a society of good men supporting each other, their families and the community, as most worshipful Brother Don used to say. Our craft is the modern personification and practice of the traditions that have inspired countless men in society, shape this world into a positive place for life and human development. Freemasonry is not destined to be perpetually relevant in the lives of man, but with our efforts it can be. It must and it will if we seize control of our inevitable destiny. Thank you, brethren.
Fabulous. Absolutely fabulous. Questions?
Questions? Yes.
Fred, he loves your papers, he reads them. Only man in the room.
They always say the worst thing you do is be your hero.
I cheat, it's not a question.
Yes. Okay.
It's an observation.
Brother Jack, that is the most significant paper that I've heard in many years. You have encapsulated so many areas of concern that I have endeavoured to express in a faltering way in things that I'll share with you later on, little pamphlets and cards that I've made, but why I'm a Freemason, what is a lodge. That is a little different to what you are dealing with here. You have given a critique on the situation which we find ourselves not only within a craft, but in the context of the society in which we live. You have bounced one off the other. We can quibble about detail. It doesn't matter in general. I agree with you, you'd be surprised, with nearly all of it. But sincerely, I honestly believe it's the most significant paper I've heard on this matter in many years. Now, I'm going to be perhaps out of order here, so I'll apologise. From my recent experience of Grand Lodge, they're not capable of responding to that. We have to respond to it. And that, I feel, is the biggest challenge we have. We have to take it on. Us Freemasons have to take it on. I'll move on from that. Just one technical thing. Could I recommend to you, question of semantics, don't use the word spiritualism. It can be misunderstood. I have an understanding of that word, which is what you will find in the Oxford English Dictionary as well. Spiritualism is a particular form of spiritual thought and practice. The word to use is spirituality. Now, this is the case in my church, which is a very broad one, and tries to use a language, terminology, where we get away from, although being an institution, we don't use institutional language if we can avoid it, as far as expressing the larger view. Freemasonry expresses the larger view. So we're trying to get away from sectarian language. We mustn't get away from spirituality, and I think you would agree. There are perceptions out there which society have, the millennials and others have. This is always the case. In fact, I was tempted to bring along tonight from 1696 a little advertisement in the newspaper, and the Grand Lodge in London has an original of that, of warning people against freemasons, as they were called. That it went back then, and even earlier with the Kirk in Edinburgh, that Freemasonry has always been misunderstood, but of course we haven't helped. So thank you again for that. I would like to see your paper get legs, and I'll do what I can, and I'm sure this lodge will, to ensure that it gets legs, because we actually need, I think from this personally, that we actually set up a day as a workshop on those concepts and so forth, and look at them. Thank you.
Very humble. Thank you very much.
I also am a fellow Masonic heretic, as you are. The remark I would make is, before I ask my question, is also be very, very careful how you talk about the gender pay gap. It does not exist. Because if you compare in overall average terms, yes, there's a gender pay gap. But if you have a look at the hours and responsibilities that women take compared to men, the rates of pay are the same. So there are other factors in there, so I would caution you on that. The suggestion I would make, and it's something that I take into my Masonic discussions with young men, is you're talking about millennials with parental pressure behind them. The word that I kept bounding around in my head whilst you were speaking was rights, 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 rights. This organisation of ours, brethren, has the opportunity of teaching responsibility. Now, if we have our young men taking responsibility for any task in the Masonic world, the reward they will get from taking that responsibility is enormous. I learnt that from the now recently deceased Roger Levy when he proposed me into this organisation. He said, I'm not going to get behind you and push you through this organisation. It is up to you to take responsibility for what you want to do in the organisation. That's the reward that I've got out of it. If you can somehow craft that into your proposed solutions, I think it's going to give you even more traction. Well done, Jack. I'm proud to.
And I'll say in my paper, which I hope you all get the chance to read, because it does much more justice to my arguments than what I've just done. I do talk about the need for responsibility should be embedded into what we're doing.
That's something we can sell, that's my point.
In fact, Dr. Jordan Pedersen, who we all know is a clinical psychologist at the University of Toronto, he has done through a lot of research, and there's been a lot of independently verifiable research that confirms this, that young people, especially young men, are craving a sense of responsibility. Because everything's been handed to them, they don't feel as though that they're actually contributing to anything. They're building anything. So it's an important thing, and we do that. We do that. Freemasonry does that, just the way we do it. We're going to make sure it's obvious and targeted. That's what we need to do. We'll just grab this question and we'll go to Chris in the back.
In terms of involving our partners or our respective Masons partners in the process, there's a lot of emphasis now on men's health and men's mental health.
Yep.
Now, us being a male organisation, a men's organisation, I would suggest that there is value in promoting those aspects to the relevant partners as a positive. So have your partner involved in Freemasonry, and you've got a better chance that they're not, if bad things, they're going to have a support network around them. So, and I don't know if we all experienced that, but we've been here. For somebody who hasn't been here, expressing something that we take for granted, maybe we need to define it.
Yeah, and that fits well within the scope of what I'm saying. We need to sell the tangible benefits of our Masonic membership to the partners of Freemasons who join, so they know that their partners aren't just going off and wasting time and resources. They're actually going away and acquiring a tangible benefit for the family, which is so important. Yeah.
The second part of this is you talk about the millennials and the Me Too generation.
Yeah.
There are some great flashes in the pans and wonderful people in that group. There are also a lot of what I would consider non-functional deadwood.
Yeah.
I would also suggest that perhaps we need to be more selective in our selection criteria. Now, Grand Lodge has been promoting the fact that we need to get more members, we need to recruit more people. It doesn't matter if we keep recruit. We've got to turn ourselves to a men's social club. We don't need any of this old stuff. Now, I found that deeply distressing to hear those aspects, because I believe that we run the risk of throwing the baby out with the bathwater by doing those things. And we'll transition into something that really will go the way of the 12 apostles if we do that.
Well, just to build on that, if I can. I personally understand the concerns relating to the perception, and like I said, perception is reality. The perception that Grand Lodge wants to just bring as many people in to pay capitation fees. I understand that perception. I don't necessarily, the people I recruit, the people I'm involved with bringing in, Ian, he put me onto that young lad I met yesterday. There is a process in place that's filtering out and focusing on quality. What we want as Freemasons, regardless of whether we're Grand Lodge or lodges or whatever we might identify, we want one thing. We want this craft to be around in 100 years' time. We want our grandkids to enjoy this organisation. I want my 50-year jewel, all right? And no one's going to stop me from getting it. And we're going to make sure that regardless of the different views we have, we walk in lockstep towards that purpose of ensuring that we bring in good people. They're going to be around for the lifelong journey. And the only way we're going to do it is by accepting the fact problems we face and implementing solutions. And the stuff you're talking about is exactly what I'm talking about. So let's focus on the solutions to the problems. And let's work together towards that. That's the best thing we can do.
You are right there, Jack. So there is a process in place that we vet the prospective members. My predecessor, Eric Williams, was fanatical in that regard, that you'd go through, you'd talk to them, possibly talk to their wives if it was able to make sure that they are joining for the right reasons and that they are going to stay around for a while anyway, and I intend to continue that. And as Jack said, we have the interviews with the candidates to make sure that it does suit them.
What we need to do is our organisation is to move away from fluff. We do a lot of fluff, a lot of things we don't need to do that we do, and we need to focus on fundamental basic principles. And if we get the basics right, we will grow in the right way. Simple as that. Simple as that. Yep.
Yeah, basically everything you've said about the millennials from my own experience has been true. But everything there resonates with me. I remember getting participation trophies and they were god awful. And it's funny because actually millennials actually realise how awful they are. But I can see myself growing up that it has impacted my view of life. For those brethren who don't know, I've been running a survey online. You've probably seen it through Victoria. Not to go too much into the results because they're quite interesting, but pretty much all the younger members, they've all commented they love that Freemasonry does give them that sense of responsibility. They love, and a lot of them actually love interacting with a lot of the older members as well. Because something as well which came to mind when I was reading Jack's paper as well was, okay, so we've got higher rates, less retention of marriages these days, which means that we have higher rates of divorce, which means more kids growing up in single parent homes. A lot of the time it's about death.
Yes.
And so a lot of young guys, I'm lucky in that my parents, stayed together, separated, got back together and everything. But I can see a lot of the other young guys that I know, they love the fact that when they come to Freemasonry, they can come around these father figures as such, the older men that can teach them how to be a man, teach them responsibility. And the young guys, they love responsibility, they love getting dressed up, they love going to do ritual and everything, they love all that stuff. So I completely agree with all your paper, and I just thought I'd add that remark there.
Thank you. Yeah.
I found being a member of both Freemasonry as well as a men's club in the city, that is a distinct benefit of being in a single-sex environment. Our work is so casual and co-gender everywhere. We work in mixed workplaces, everything is mixed gender. And I've had people say, don't you get bored without women? You go, no. Actually, everything else in our life includes women. It's nice to be in a place where there is a single-sex environment. And from a growth point of view, I've noticed that there are some things that only an older man can teach a younger man. A metaphorical slap over the back of the head saying, don't do that. We don't do that as a gentleman or as a skill set. It's the same as there are some things that only an older woman can teach a younger woman. If as a man we said it, we'd be in the wrong. There is a time and a place for this, and we're one of the last bastions of that opportunity.
I read a book about Scientology. It was all about the growth of Scientology, and they said that one thing that really made their religion so important in the US was the recruitment of Tom Cruise. So I'm just saying, do you have any plans to use role models, positive role models? Because I'll give you an example. I have a millennial friend, and I mentioned, he goes, oh, Freemasonry is, it's old guys. And I said, well, Steve Wozniacki, who's the co-founder of Apple, is a Freemason. And then he immediately completely changed his perception of it.
So to build on what you said, this is really a big issue, and it's a chicken and egg situation. If we provide the things we promise we provide, we will attract those good people, which will in turn attract others to follow. But in saying that, when we're not providing those things, how do we bring those people in to have the reverse, the exact effect that you're talking about? I personally, and this might be a little bit controversial, but I personally am a big fan of the idea of the Grand Mastership being similar to what it is in England, where it actually belongs to a figurehead. I would love Sir Peter Cosgrove to come along and say, I'd love to be Grand Master of Freemasons Victoria. And you have someone like Most Worshipful Brother Keith being a provincial Grand Master, who in effect is the Grand Master, but a Governor General-like person coming in and leading that sort of. I think that'd be a great idea. But look, I don't want to take away Keith's. Keith is pretty good, guys. So I mean, he's close, but it's an example. So I'll let you run the questions. Go ahead,
One statistic you might want to chase up on, and Worshipful Brother John Patterson would be a great help here.
Okay.
9 people die every day on Australian roads. 6 people die every day from suicide. 4 of them are men. Of the 9 people, the government response nationally to the road toll is enormous. The government response to the suicide problem is negligible. We have an opportunity here as a Masonic organisation to have a positive effect on that particular statistics. I invite you to speak to John about it.
We're more relevant now than we've ever been at capture that.
Jack. Sorry, Brother Jack. You've given us a wonderful set of almost a roadmap to bring us into the next generation. If there was one part of that solution that we should go away and, as I'm sure all of us are members of other lodges, take back with us to our lodges, what would be the first action that you take back to those lodges?
Well, that's a very tough question, Simon, because in my view, these pillars are not independent of each other, they're interdependent. Honestly, I think the easiest thing we can do is fix this problem with women.
Yep.
I think we can fix that overnight. I think we could fix that very, very easily.
Lodge of the Golden Fleece used to.
And we could do that. So go back to your lodge and fix it. It's a simple one. The other stuff, the mentoring, well, it's going to take time and resources, but that you can fix.
It's interesting, across all the jurisdictions, New South Wales, Tasmania, Victoria, everywhere, I've had at least 2 or 3 comments from each jurisdiction of include women more. So I think it's something as well that's quite popular and people want to bring it.
Yeah.
So,
it is tricky though, because we are an all-male organisation. My own wife says, you know, it's for you, it's for men.
And that's fine.
Sound like my fiance like, yeah, go there, do your stuff.
Yeah, get out.
I think the member of the board at the back's got a question, so we've got to keep it happening.
Thank you, Jack. I'd just like to thank you for the paper. If we don't all agree with everything that's in it, what it does do is it gives us all the opportunity to reflect and to think about our own position on certain really important topics.
Talking about things we don't agree on, Craig, this is one thing I didn't highlight in the thing, and I think for the sake of transparency I should say it. One of the things I talk about is that when a young person joins this organisation, although we've come a very long way, they feel less empowered. Brethren, the past masters meeting is a thing of the past. It should be abolished. It shouldn't exist. What you're doing with past masters meetings is you're actually excluding your most enthusiastic and happy members who want to contribute and make a contribution. In the paper, I also contend that all other barriers to members participating in the democratic election of their leaders should be removed. And I strongly believe that, because I think that if people are going to come to an organisation and say and be told, you're a brother, meet on the level, you're going to be treated as an adult, you're going to be given responsibility, you're going to be taken seriously, but by the way, you can't participate in the selection of those blokes because you're not experienced enough and you don't know enough because you're meant to be a Master Mason for 5 years and that apparently qualifies you. It's rubbish. It's rubbish. And we need to be careful about what we do as an organisation when it comes to participation. When a member joins, they're either a full member of this organisation or they're not. And no one's going to tolerate being told that they're not because they wear a white apron rather than a dark blue apron. We've got to move away from this. And when we had 100,000 members, maybe it was something we could afford to do. They left, so what? We've got 10 other blokes lining up outside. And my contention is we need to make this organisation a place where people enjoy to go to, feel empowered to be a member of, and can walk away to their friends. And this is the solution. This probably answers your question better, Simon. Freemasonry will be relevant when we can go to our friends and 100% look them in the eye and say, you should join, you're going to love it. And I challenge anyone who goes to their friends and can look them in the eye and not... I've done it. I've proposed people to Freemasonry. I've been up at night thinking, shh, I hope this doesn't happen. I hope this doesn't happen. Oh, I hope that doesn't happen. Because they're going to come to me and say, Jack, what have you done? What have you done? So anyway, I've got the time
No, so what I was going to go on with saying, I couldn't help but think about when you're talking about ladies and the effect that not only the 6 o'clock swill might have had on us back in the day, but maybe Gough Whitlam's 1975 Family Law Act, which said that there's no fault divorce.
Yeah.
And I think that may also have loosened up.
I agree.
The commitment.
That and the financial situation, because you know these days if a woman leaves, she can get a full-time job and create a career. It won't be maybe as easy if she's coming in a bit later in life, but she can do it. Back in the old days, it was economic impoverishment, serious destitution, and you know that's something right. But brethren, just as a way of wrapping up, I'd like to say it has been an absolute privilege and honour to present this to you today. I want this to be the commencement of a conversation. I really do hope that you enjoyed it. I hope you read the final paper, and I hope to come back again in the future. Thank you.
On behalf of the Lodge, I'd like to thank you for this paper. And I just finished with one comment. I like your analogy with the 12 apostles. Because if you think about, there's another element to Freemasonry which I think is important. I think it has a very strong mystical element, which you could argue goes back thousands of years, right? Probably at least 5,000 years to the ancient Sumerians, where there's a direct link on those.
We embrace those traditions.
Those traditions are there, and of course those traditions have prevailed for century after century, and so like the apostles, they can erode and go back into dust. We can erode and go into dust. but those mystical elements will, continue on there in the heart of man, and we can choose whether we're going to be part of it or not. Whether this organisation is going to continue on.
Thank you, Wes. I appreciate it.